Welcome everyone to Ask an Expert Q&A Live with Kristine Shreve and Erich Campbell. And I'm happy to see everybody here today. I am, of course, Kristine Shreve. Pretty easy to tell us apart. I'm the one without a beard, in case you were wondering. If you couldn't tell, if you can't tell that, I'm a little concerned, but hey, we'll go with it because, you know, it's a Monday and it's a new month. So, but I did shave this morning, so we should be good. Anyway, I just wanted to say thank you all for being here. We're so excited to see you. And I wanted to tell you that Erich is here as well. And you all know him from, ever so many things, but let's talk about a few of them. There is, of course, erichcampbell.com. And there's also his Facebook page. And he is a digitizer. He's an educator. He's an all-around great guy. Personally, I like him a lot. I know a lot of you do too. And I'm going to bring him in because I think I've embarrassed him enough now. So here we go. There's Erich.
Yes, here I am. And I mean, I could embarrass you back because we all know Kristine from everything she did, certainly with Enmart, but she's an educator. You haven't seen her at the DAX shows, you're missing out. And everything she's written, all the podcasts she's now doing. If you haven't seen this podcast, if you're on this channel, you probably already know Women in Business. If you're coming in from one of my channels, check out Kristine's other podcasts that she's doing.
Women in Business. There we go.
So,
doesn't have a good little moniker yet, but I'm working on it. So,
it's a good podcast, though. You've had really good guests on. So
and go check that page out if you haven't, because that's where you can get all the latest information on that.
Absolutely.
And then, of course, since we're pimping me, Women in Garment Decoration, my group on Facebook. So.
Which, by the way, all I hear is wonderful things about women in garment decoration. So everybody who's thinking about that, well, every woman who's thinking about
everybody who's female, yeah,
everybody who's female, go and check that out.
Our little pink clubhouse.
I'll say
that was actually when I asked the question about whether or not we should be female only. I used a little pink "No Boys Allowed" sign as the graphic on that one. So it always makes me laugh.
I like that. No, at least, like I said, everybody who's talked to me about it has said so many good things, and I've heard, from like Lisa Shaw, who's there, who's also with me at Imbrilliance, and I mean, long term, but she's before me at Imbrilliance by many years.
Right.
But like I said, Lisa Shaw, who's there, and Carolyn Cagle, who's there with you all the time and doing admin work. She's incredible. I've known her for
Carolyn's amazing.
Carolyn's awesome. Jane Swansea, who you just had on. So,
Tanya Joysher,
yes,
awesome Kelly DeFries.
Kelly's on there too. Awesome.
I could list names all day.
I don't have to be in the clubhouse to know you guys have such a crew, and everyone has really good stuff about it. So I always recommend it.
I've always said that you and Aaron and Terry are our fairy godfathers anyway. Used to be fairy grandfathers, but I think Aaron and Terry took offense, so you became godfathers.
Terry's actually a grandfather. He should probably be cool, man.
You would think, but he seemed to take more offense than the other people.
Well, we give him trouble. We give him trouble because Terry, if you guys don't know, from Two Regular Guys, Terry Combs, you probably do know, but if you don't know, Two Regular Guys podcast on every Friday morning. Terry Combs, he always comes on and says like, "Oh, well, I started my first screen printing business in 1979." I'm like, "Oh yeah, just prior to me being born." And so I always like to give him crap because we always give him crap for being the older guy on the show.
Yeah,
but the funny thing
10 in 79. So I mean, I was born, but I was still below my teens. Anyway, before we do anything else, I want to say hello to a few people. Hello, Cindy. Thank you for watching.
Awesome.
Tom Farr is here.
Tom of Buzzards Bay Embroidery. Awesome, dude.
Frank Dunn is here.
Joining from across the pond.
Watching us all the way from the UK. Yes.
Absolutely. Thank you, Frank.
Good Lord. I know that from the Take Up, which is Erich's podcast on Fridays.
My other show.
At 2:30 Mountain Time, 4:30 Eastern Standard Time. If you're me.
This is true.
Hey, I'm going to just everything you're doing, dude. I'm going to talk about
Thank you much.
And Jeff Fuller is here. So many names I don't know yet. Oh, you'll get to know.
You'll know him.
Yeah, Mike Muldowney.
Nice to see Mike here.
3:30. Cindy says, I am not sure if I belong to Erich's Facebook page. Well, you can go like the page, Cindy, and then you'll be able to see what he's putting up.
I'll say that anybody who's already following me on my profile, you're probably getting all the content anyway. The Facebook page allows me to do some more promotions and stuff that you can't do with your private profile. The thing is, I'll just say I am a industry veteran to the point that I was on Facebook before we had the ability to do this stuff, before we had the profiles. And so many of my people are actually my friends. My profile is all friends. I have hundreds and hundreds of friends on Facebook.
Hundreds and hundreds. He's very popular.
I know. I add everybody mostly. If you have any embroidery in your profile and you say you want to be my friend, we're probably friends.
And Jeff wanted to make sure that Central Standard Time wasn't left out when we were talking about the timing for Eric's The Take Up podcast Fridays at 2:30 Mountain Time, 3:30.
Thank you, everybody, for all the promos. This is also for
4:30 Standard Time.
Well, then let everybody know the timing for Women in Business too while we're at it.
Oh God, now I got to count backwards. That's 3 p.m. Eastern Standard, 2 p.m. Central Time, 1 p.m. Mountain Time, and 12 p.m. Pacific Time, I believe, on Wednesdays. Every Wednesday.
Women in Business. Awesome.
Yes. So there we are. We have now. Oh, and poor Cindy says, I graduated high school in 1979. Y'all are making me feel old.
Don't feel bad, because I have since now. I've gone to all the trade shows, and I kept on thinking that I was the young guy. I had this feeling like when I came into the industry. No, not at all. I came into the industry, and I really had like all the salespeople would kind of, they wouldn't listen to me about embroidery. They wouldn't listen to me about anything I said. They wouldn't listen to me about the quotes or the art. And so I had this kind of, I'll admit, I grew up with this kind of chip on my shoulder, because I was really young when I came into the industry, like a teenager when I came into the industry and started advertising. And so I had this chip on my shoulder as like, I'm the young guy who's going to come in and mix things up. And then I realized one day that people were coming to my classes going, wow, my whole career I've been listening, like watching you write this stuff or seeing you on this show. And I'm like, your whole career? It's like these people are like half my age, and they're like, oh yeah, I just started and for my whole career. And I'm like, you're one of the veterans of the industry that I've watched forever. I'm like, oh, I thought I was just getting started. So, don't feel bad. The young folks come to me all the time and do that now.
Well, I was at Enmark for 14 years.
Yeah.
So, I mean, when I started in 2006, I felt like I was a total newbie. I didn't know anything.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you and I have a really similar kind of tenure there. I mean, I was at Black Duck for like 13 years, same kind of time being too.
Yep. Jeff says, I felt young until my hair started falling out. Now I just feel old. Well,
mine fell out young, my friend. So I can't say anything. I was in my 20s and lost my hair
too. So, I mean, I went gray before I was 35. So
yeah, we have that pain.
Yeah. So it's like everybody goes, well, why is your hair gray? I'm like, because it went that way. And I just was like, that's what it's going to do.
I had one of those at the one of the shows. Somebody came up to me and said, you know, you should really tell them the magazine picture they put of you makes you look like a bald guy. And I took my hat off. I said, because I'm a bald guy. Yeah. I look like that because I'm bald. Yeah, no, I lost my hair. I do have the ponytail, but I always tell people I have that wizard hair, that 1970s van with you got the wizard with the bald head and the hair flowing out the back. Yeah. I got the wizard hair. I can't help that. My wife likes the long hair in the back. I keep it. There are days where I get very unhappy that she likes it, because I'm ready to shave it all off and just admit what happened. But you know,
mine's driving me nuts right now because I can't get it cut, so all the curls are coming.
And I was going to say, I think it looks great. I was going to say that.
Well, thank you. But normally, if you've ever seen pictures of me, I wear very, very short hair because my hair likes to curl like a crazy person. And with the lack of, this has nothing to do with anything. I'm fully aware of this. But
oh, come on. This is how we do.
The danger of Eric and I getting anywhere together where we can talk is we can go for an hour on
fun
anything.
Stuff. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So who wants to take a bet on bonus time tonight? Because I have a feeling.
I wouldn't lay money on avoiding bonus time.
More questions. Let's see. Jeff, or more comments. Hats are where it's at.
Yes, they are. Keep burning. And then New Mexico's done.
Mike, some customers make me feel like it's my first day. Others like I'm ready to retire. I'm so there for that, Mike.
Yes, sir.
Let's see. Jerry says I was gray in my 20s. Thank you, Jerry, because I went gray early too. And everybody was like, oh, Cindy, thank you. I was always going to say your hair looks really nice. Thank you. I hope you're talking to me. So, you know,
mine
not
can't
that Eric's
look nice.
hair doesn't look nice, but
you wouldn't know.
Oh, Jeff thinks
A real question, Jeff. Okay.
Jeff thinks we should get back on program here.
Let's do it.
Okay, I'll fire off a question. What is the best way to structure pricing on customer supplied garments? I'd like to work out the time, but I miss out on the add-on for the garment.
You know what? Having taught on this, and we've both taught on this, I think we're going to have different stuff to talk about. So this should be interesting. We may have conflicting ideas on how to handle this.
I don't think so. We generally don't, but you go, and if I think you're wrong, I'll tell you.
I'll take that. I'll take that. Usually when I teach multiple angles on it because I think that no one angle works for everybody. That's the first thing, is that I don't think there's a right answer on customer supplied garments. What I will say is, in the shops I've worked in where you do both markup and customer supply, the concept is that we add either some sort of surcharge or we have a different pricing scale for customer supplied decoration in order to make up for the issues. Now, what some people will also do is, instead of doing, even if they provide their own garments, they don't do markup there on either case, so that they have a uniform pricing structure for decoration no matter what. And then they just say, I can either provide or you can bring them in, and this is my structure. But I have some other, concepts in place for if something gets ruined in the customer supplied side, this is how this works, which it might be a little bit different than if I supply. So usually the way you're going to handle this is by either increasing the decoration rates so that you get the appropriate markup there, or by having no markup on the garments in the first place, having customer supply and other garments equally there, or by not taking customer supply so that you can continue to get your markup. That's really how that usually works. Now, the other method this works is by not making a ton of money on customer supply if you have a larger part of the order that is not customer supplied. I've seen people handle things this way. If your order has a certain percentage of material that's not customer supplied, we go ahead and price it all the same because we are making our money on the customer on the provided garments and are forgiving you the rates on the customer supplied stuff. I don't love that because then it sets up kind of a weird dynamic of trying to figure out where that level is. It's not my favorite thing. For me, the shops I've been in and I've actually worked at, mostly it was actually two schemes. It was here's our supply. If we supply the garments, this is what the costs are. If you do customer supply, these are what the costs are. So that was usually how he handled it. But I don't think that any one of those is necessarily better. It's just that the underlying rate thing is that rates have to make sense for how much labor you're putting in and for the value proposition for what you're putting together. Because I'm always the first one who says I like to uncouple rates from just more labor, more labor, more materials shouldn't be the only reason your prices are higher. So there's that too. There's the whole value-based pricing argument to be had, but if we're just talking about basic, how are we covering our time? That's how I handle it.
I don't disagree with any of that, so I'm not going to fight.
I thought for sure there'd be something we could spice this thing up with disagreeing.
No, not really. I mean, honestly, I think it's a classic argument that anybody who works in this space has at some time or another, and some people are very much, I don't want to do it at all. I will not take customer supplied no matter what you do. Other people do half and half. Some people are like, whatever, fine. And then you hear all the stories about my customer brought in these shirts that had been in a box in the attic for 40 years and they smell like mildew. And, so I think it's a feature or a bug. I don't know what you want to call it, but it's a part of being in the industry. And basically what I always preach with anything that comes to pricing is you need to figure it out in advance, and whatever it is, you need to stick to it. And if you decide that you want to do it, then great. If you decide that you don't want to do it, that's fine too. But whatever your decision is, and if you decide that you do want to do it, then make sure that you understand how your pricing is going to work appropriately for that. So it's kind of and there's also a difference too, I think, between somebody who's bringing in a couple $100 leather jacket for you to embroider on and somebody that's bringing in 14 shirts they got from Walmart too.
Well, and that's the thing. When we're talking about small to mediums, what we're usually saying with customer supply is somebody who's trying to save money by walking up to, Sam's Club or, Costco and walking back with, whatever shirts they picked up there. Then
Right.
they're thinking that they're going to save money overall. A lot of the time, it really is us explaining where that money's going. We can usually hit those prices and make them happy with that, especially if we're pricing the decoration correctly so that we're making money. But the other thing is there are also customer supplied, quote unquote, customer supply, where we're talking about large contract shops that they're accepting drop ship from, Sanmar or Broad or whatever. They're accepting these large drop ship orders. And what they're doing is limiting their exposure by not having their money tied up in blanks. That's another argument that I go, okay, that's actually not the same as the argument between am I going to let, Joe or Jane from off the street come in with 5 garments instead of me providing 5 garments? That's a very different discussion than am I the kind of person who wants to buy $3,000 worth of shirts or have somebody else buy it for me and drop them onto my deck, and then I don't have to have my money in those shirts and I get to stay liquid in just doing my decoration. That's a different matter altogether. I still think, and I think both of us agree on this, the crux, however, is knowing how much time things take, how much money you have in your labor, how much overhead you have in your building and your equipment, and being able to not only cover that, because breaking even doesn't mean anything. We don't want to just move money around, but being able to pay ourselves and profit no matter what comes in. If you're not focusing there first, that's where you start making mistakes. If you think it's the thing that we always deal with embroidery, dollar per thousand. 99 cents a thousand stitches. I hate $1 per thousand.
Yeah,
not that might not be where you arrive.
Not a good thing. No. Well, and the other thing
it's too pat of an answer.
The other thing too with customer supplied garments that you do have to take into account is if you have curated your selection of garments that you offer properly, you're going to know how they work with whatever decoration methods you use.
Yes, indeed.
If the customer brings something in, it could be something like Carolyn's been here leaving comments that I think make me laugh, like horse blankets.
Oh, I've been
Or this is my favorite. Did a mink coat once. Yowza.
Oh yeah. Or heirlooms. If anybody here hasn't done handkerchiefs or a quilt that was 200 years old, where they want they want you to put machine embroidery on some beautiful handmade quilt. There are certain things that are not the same as someone bringing in that, like we said, that Walmart shirt. It's a very different world.
Okay. And Mike has an extension of Jeff's question: contract customer versus non-industry customer, both still supplying items, which I think you touched on a little bit in your answer, Eric.
Well, they're different matters altogether, because a non-industry customer who's bringing you 5 items, you don't have the scale of efficiency that makes it worthwhile to do the kind of pricing that a contract person does. Because if you're getting in, hundreds of items or whatever, and then you're setting these limits, if you ever worked with ad specialties, they tell you exactly how things are going. If you don't approve on time, if you have too many colors, everything is really well defined so that they can make money. And when you're in contract work, I feel like it's the same way. You're not taking one of everything. One of the largest customers that one of my companies ever fired, the reason they got fired as a customer was because they brought in bins and bins of customer supply. Usually that was okay because we were doing a lot of stuff that we were supplying ourselves and the stuff they were supplying, but they started doing things where it's like, okay, we have 5 Sherpa vests, 3 tissue tees, 5 stocking hats, and they think that we're going to run everything in the same fashion with the same materials and designs. And it doesn't work. And then also tissue tees. If you ever tried to put a heavy embroidered logo on a tissue tee, it's not a good experience. No matter, it's just a bad idea to do.
Yeah, it's not. Well, and that's the other thing too. A lot of it comes back to all the stuff we've been talking about here. Also comes back to customer education. They don't know what they don't know. So they don't know that you have to digitize designs differently if you're putting them on different materials. Yeah. They don't know that things run different. They don't have any idea about any of that because it's not their job to know that. It's yours. So that's something too, that, the customer is just coming in with, like Carolyn says, baby baptism gown, scary.
Yeah, sure.
And they want you to do something with it, and they don't know which is good. They don't know all the ways that this could go sideways horribly.
True.
And, Oh boy.
Well, and I'll tell you this. The other thing that's hard for me is everyone says, okay, well, yeah, but I have a waiver that they signed. If you think that someone's relationship with you will be saved by signing a waiver that says, yup, I might ruin this, they expect that you're a professional and that you won't ruin something. We all know that things happen anyway. But the customer is going to look at that and go, oh, yeah, but that doesn't happen much, does it? And you'll say no. And then the one time that you actually do chew up a garment beyond belief, you're just out, you're left in the lurch. And the truth of the matter is that relationship is probably broken. The trust is probably, at least it's damaged. Not through any fault of your own. You have to explain things very clearly and make it clear that these things can happen, but it doesn't, that relationship never gets saved by legal language. So for me, it's hard.
Is just a protective coating. And really, it's probably, when it comes to waivers, it's probably not going to protect anything, even though you have people sign it. It's just one of those things that people do because it makes them feel better.
It's good that people have a warning and that they actually were forced to think about it.
Yeah, it's good that they know. I mean, you should
always. Are you really
indemnified? Explain it. But it's the same thing with, you tell people, look both ways when you're crossing the street, and everybody goes, well, nobody ever gets hit by a bus here. Well, it only takes one time.
Yeah.
So,
and here's the thing too. You can't sign away your rights. Even if you say you want to sign them away, you can't sign them away. If you do something that's grossly negligent, they can still come for you no matter what waiver they sign, because you're negligent and you're going to get caught for that stuff. I'm not saying that that's anything that we're dealing with here, but there is a certain kind of like, if I had them sign it, I'm protected. Sure. The other thing is you could have them. We're in a world where people go on social media and put you on blast for everything that you do that they don't like. That's not a great world all the time that we can just get canceled out like that. But at the same time, that's real. And it might be worthwhile to talk to somebody ahead of time and say, this is why I don't like taking customer supply of a certain kind. Or yes, I'll bring in your customer supply, after which, and this is something I've done before. I said, bring in your customer supply. We will evaluate it. And if it works, we'll use it. If it's not going to work with your design or your style, we're going to tell you we can't do that. You're welcome to go buy it, but I'm telling you, this is at the risk that I will say no.
Right.
At the risk that it doesn't work for us, and I'll provide you another option, or we can handle everything. And you actually use this as a sales tactic. You go, I can handle everything, and you don't have to go shopping for shirts. Let's find a price point and a shirt that you like, and something that fulfills those needs that you have. And then if there's certain specialty use cases, I'm not going to say, hey, I'm a huge person. Everybody knows this. I'm a pretty big guy. There's bigger people out there, but a pretty big guy. Not every piece of clothing I've ever had fits me very well, even after I lost a ton of weight, but I'm still tall and kind of weirdly shaped. So I don't like every shirt that I can buy off the rack. I'm the kind of person who is going to bring that extra shirt in and say, yeah, here's 15 shirts that I'm buying for the team, but we got one guy who's not going to wear these shirts. Can I just have his shirt in here? I will pay that, here, there's an extra service fee of 30% on the decoration. Cool. Put that shirt in. There's a reason why to take customer supply, even when you're a shop that doesn't do all the customer supply stuff. But you really do have to work with that. I mean, you do have to work with it. The biggest thing is, though, being upfront with people. Being upfront with people, setting expectations, working on expectations, no matter what subject we're talking about here today, being upfront with your customers about the reality of what's going to go on. And just setting the expectations and managing expectations is the best thing you can do in any field. And honestly, customer supplied garments is one of the ones where it comes up all the time.
Well, and the other half of this too, and this is something that I've talked about quite frequently in my seminars, is think about all this stuff ahead of time. Have a plan, have a policy, know what you're going to do. The worst thing that can happen is somebody walks in and goes, Erich scenario, hey, we've got a 15-member team and 14 of these guys can wear these size shirts, and this one guy he needs something different. You need to know what your answer is to that before it comes up.
Also, if you're a multi-salesperson shop, be careful about not having the same consistent answer.
Yeah, so it's got to be a policy that comes from the top. And there's a few more questions or a few more comments here. I do not want to know the cost of the product, Cindy says. That makes me nervous. I can understand that. Mike says, this will help me explain to my partner why we don't charge contract as much as runabout customers for the same work on supplied. Which makes sense. And Mike also says cases like that, special shirts for weird shapes, I think is more about customer service than shop policy. And I won't disagree with you, Mike, but I think it's about both. It needs to be part of your shop policy because it's going to come up, but it is a customer service thing too.
Especially if you're delegating.
Yeah.
But solopreneurs, you're making your own choices. But I mean, if you're delegating anything,
if you have somebody else running your front counter, then they need to know what the answer is to that. And the answer shouldn't be, well, let me talk to my manager.
Yeah. Well, and also, I think we have Carolyn saying something about this. She says more money down there.
Money.
Sorry to bring that up. She says more money. Well, what I'm going to say is, honestly, remember that you're providing more value. You're providing value by doing something for someone that is not the norm. And there is something to that. The same way we have kind of an efficiency of scale when we're doing a bunch of the same garment that we know we can run that works well, we should literally be taking less time and effort to get those things run. So we actually do have some room to play with the pricing if we want to. But the other thing we can do is make more margin. And if we're going to do something that's outside of our norm, that is harder to run, there's no problem for us to say, oh yeah, it just costs a little bit more for customer supplied because they are not set up the way everything else is. The only problem we ever have with that, or that I've heard people complain to me about with that, is that they have the competition down the street that takes every job and doesn't care and doesn't manage. All they're doing is like, they're hungry. They just take every job and they'll do everything for very low margin. Sometimes you'll have somebody compare to them and say, okay, well, those people don't say anything for customer supply. And especially when you're feeling secure, that's one of those times where I say, yeah, well, you can have them do it for that if you want to. We do this because here's our answer. It's about customer supply. It's about quality control. And whichever answer you decide to reveal to your customer about that is yours. But there is a reason behind this stuff. Like I said, people always ask me, well, how can you charge less for these? When we talk about pricing, we talk about, say, like categories of pricing where we go up by certain quantities or by stitch count. That's the other thing people ask me about. Do you price lower on stitch count as your stitch counts get higher? And I say you can. Why? Because changing garments on the machine takes time. And the longer you have on each run, you should have less of the changeover time. There is a real efficiency of scale there. It's not just that it's baked into some sort of theory we all agreed to as a culture that as we have more stitches, they're less, or as we have more garments, they're less. The concept is the fewer times I have to go back to get more information, the fewer times I rethread the machine, the fewer times I put new garments on, it should mean that I have a scale where I'm being more efficient because I'm not touching that machine as much. I'm not having to fetch new stuff, rethread, change things over, more color changes, whatever it is. If we're not doing that, there should be that the job actually is taking less time and is efficient because it just keeps running. So that's, people always ask me that. They're like, oh, is it arbitrary? I'm like, it's not arbitrary. It should be. Arbitrary might be how we break it down, but it's more like, yes, there's an efficiency of scale. I don't think that everything should be pegged to that, but there really should be a reason why you can charge less for these, for those kind of jobs or for contract jobs, like Mike said.
Definitely. Well, I think it comes down to, I was listening to you talk and now I completely lost what I wanted to say. So hopefully it'll come back. In the meantime, I will talk too much. Put up with Carolyn. No, that's fine. I got lost somewhere in the middle of it. You made a point and I went, oh, I need to talk about that. And then she's gone. Great. Thank you for asking. Let me know if there's anything I can help with later. Arrives back 2 weeks later because that odd one never got ordered. That happens too.
Yes, it does.
Oh, and the whole thing. Okay, now I remember what it was. When you were talking about the place down the street that
sure.
Do it for cheaper. I mean, here's the thing with that. It's the same thing as the people that tell you, if you don't do this for me, I'll give you a bad review on Facebook. It's an empty threat for the most part. If you're prepared, if you've done your job, you have a funnel of work coming in. So you don't need this one. This one order is not going to make or break your life. One bad review is not going to make or break your business. These little petty bully people who come in and want to do this kind of crap are basically not worth your time. So send them on their way and stand for what you know you're worth. Is all I'm going to say on that. And trust me, I'm embarking on some of this myself right now. And there are times when I am pacing up and down going, I am going to ask for this. I am going to ask for this amount. I am. Yeah. And it's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard to do. And
for sure,
even though I've figured out why I think that's a reasonable amount to ask for, even though I know I can do what I am going to be asked to do, even though I have the experience and the history and whatever else, it's still very hard to put it out there and say, I think I'm worth this. And I mean, don't even get me started on how sad it is that a lot of times we peg our worth to the amount of money we're getting paid. That's sad. Yeah. But, you know, it's a very hard thing. It's also, I think, a little more complicated and difficult for women sometimes, maybe. So there's, you know, there's a whole lot of, but it doesn't really matter what your gender is. There's a whole lot of emotion and myths and taboos and everything else that's involved in the whole charging money and doing work for money and asking for money.
Here's what I'll say, and this is where I get myself in trouble. I worked in multi-decoration shops always. So it was always like there was a screen print division and an embroidery division and many other things besides. I've done everything from car wrapping and window graphics all the way through. I've done a little of everything. However, what I find is that it's often in the embroidery side for some reason. This pricing is so hard because when I'm sitting there talking to the print shop guys, and I talked about this when we had the conversion over with COVID to face masks, right?
Right.
Where everybody started running face masks. I was in a group of screen printers, and they were literally, and it was jokingly, but I'm going to go ahead and bring it up here. It might be slightly off color. They were talking about it like drug dealers. They were like, I got a brick of these masks. I'm breaking them up. I am on the corner. I'm shuffling masks all day. I'm moving pounds. I was like, the joke and the language was like, I'm a mask dealer. I'm out breaking up bricks. That is what they were talking about all day long. I'm over on the embroidery side. They're like, is it okay to charge for a mask? I mean, people really need them. And the screen printers were like literally just like, I'm in the back of my car.
They're like, I got kilos of these.
Yes, it was. They're like, they're on gram scale.
It's gonna go. Well, and a lot of that.
A different thing.
Well, we did a whole women in garment decoration podcast on is it okay to sell during a pandemic?
Yeah.
And, you know, and I'm not going to say, I mean, one of the things that's really been on my mind lately, and I'm still debating how to deal with it best, is I feel like every time I say something about the way that women are treated in some cases, that I immediately have to follow it up with, but I don't hate all men. I don't think all men are bad. And I'm like, that should just be a friggin' given, people. Excuse my language. And that was not the word I wanted to say, but I caught myself. It should just be a given that, you know, we can have a dialogue about problems without condemning. And that also extends to all the stuff that's happening out there right now with racial issues and everything. You can have a dialogue about things without condemning everybody in a group.
And when problems happen, they're happening. That's just what that's ignoring them is stupid. And I'll say, as far as like the gender stuff goes, because embroidery and commercial embroidery have some very different ways that gender kind of gets handled. I remember for years before I became a public person, when I was just Eric, the guy who runs the embroidery machine, or Eric, the guy who was in the art department doing digitizing, I had my name corrected to Erica all the time via email. All the time. The assumption was needles and thread means for sure you're not a guy. That was just and now that's not in the, and honestly in the industrial embroidery world, it was the other way around. The machine operators back in the day, the big Shifley machine operators were guys. I mean, there was a lot of guys doing punching and digitizing for a long time. A lot of guys. Doesn't mean that was primary. And also there's a lot of women doing it too. Because then I found out there's a lot of like old school women doing punching too. But it was like there were plenty of guys in it. But because the concept of embroidery being like your grandma making doilies is what they always used to say to me. That was what it was. I would get my name corrected. But I will still say that now, especially with the craft world coming further and further into business, I do have a larger female contingent that comes to a lot of my classes and stuff. And I would say there is a difference in how people are taught to ask for things. For sure.
There is and there isn't though, because here's the example that hit me today.
Sure.
And not to single these people out, but it happened to be what I saw. So I watched the Shirt Lab slate of programs today. I couldn't think of the word. The little seminars they were doing, the interviews great content, no quarrel with it. But there were like 3 or 4 examples that the speakers gave, and it was always, well, you talk to Mr. Customer and then maybe he asked his wife, or, you know, it was stuff like that. And I just was like, dude, do you even know the friggin' industry? I mean, you know, and the whole, I don't even know how to describe, and I understand that I'm maybe more aware of this than some people because of what I do. But, you know, it's like, it annoys me, and I don't know, but I feel like every time I bring it up, then I become the bitchy woman who's talking about how mean the men are, and that's not my goal, and that's not what I'm trying to do. But I get very tired of going, but I really like men. Men are great.
Well, you
I would date them. I mean, you know, come on.
Yeah, sure. Well, no, and that's what I've said many times is like, honestly, when it comes down to it, I've met people on you know, all sides of every spectrum where they have had some similar problems. I tend to be the kind of person, at least I used to be, where I was very much that don't know how to ask for money. Didn't know when I first started this, it was very much that kind of like had to ask permission for everything, said I'm sorry all the time. Still kind of do that myself now.
I yell at you still sometimes.
Yeah, I start with sorry. I walk into a room sometimes and say I'm sorry when I get there. I don't know what I'm sorry for, but I'm sure I've done something wrong. I said sorry first. So I mean, and that's something where a lot of people will ascribe that to. They say, oh, it's really women who do that all the time. I'm like, you know, I've seen people on all sides of the spectrum do that. I think certainly skews heavier that direction. But what I'll say is, in general, when we're talking about things like pricing, yeah, I have seen a lot of what we're talking about. And I do think probably, yeah, women more have talked to me about that feeling that like, I don't know how to, like, I feel like I'm charging too much for my labor, or I don't value my time enough, or this is just a hobby that I started doing for money. So I guess I shouldn't get paid because it's fun. And so that's why you'll see me frequently on my shows, no matter who I'm talking to, reaching out and like looking at the camera and doing the thing that I do where I stop and go, these are the precious moments of your life that you are spending. Get paid for the amount of life you've spent. It's because it really is a thing that I've seen a lot. And I'll agree with you that I think I do see it more with women. I will say that's in my personal experience. That's who's coming up to me and said that. But funny enough, I've seen it more in the embroidery side. It feels like the print side has been more, I would say, more industrial and focused on being an industry from the get-go, where I've seen a lot of people come into embroidery in the last while from craft. I don't see as many people who are like mocking up and doing screen printing as a craft fun project, and then somebody asks them to do a few shirts.
No, because they don't.
Not as much.
The
equipment's a different thing.
The ability isn't really there to do that as much.
Not as much. There aren't thousands and thousands of screen printing home kits going out the way there are, you know, little brother embroidery machines at Walmart. Those are everywhere, and everybody's touched one. That's a very different market than you see for screen printing. So I think sometimes when we talk about, because I know I made the joke about the screen printing people, because we like to have a friendly rivalry. I mean, I've done a bunch of work for screen printing and screen printing art too. It's not nearly my wheelhouse, so I'm not answering questions on it. But like, I make the joke, and it's facetious, because honestly, we're all in one big shop, but we did throw barbs back across between the two two departments. But I will say that when I'm talking to screen printers, they're like, yeah, we're pricing up. What are we doing? Pricing on value? Yeah. Okay, cool. How much is the markup? We do the markup. How much is, yeah, I get that. Whereas I do think that kind of emotional binding that happens more frequently in the embroidery world, and especially in the kind of craft to professional pathway that people take, no matter who they are. Anyway.
Oh, this is interesting.
Sure.
Question. How about all the men who now are hesitant in approaching us for fear of the what the hell? Like, how do they communicate with us and not be walking on glass feeling? It's a good question too. And I think honestly, the answer to this, in my opinion, is just be respectful of everybody and don't assume. Like, I can't tell you, when I worked at Enmart, one of the founders of the company, the owner and my boss, was a woman. I mean, she was a woman from like the get-go. I can't tell you how many times somebody would say, I would say, oh, I have to talk to my boss about this. And somebody go, oh, well, let me know what he says. Or, yeah, you should talk to him. The assumption was just, And I'm not saying, we all need to use genderless language or whatever, but think about it a little.
Yeah.
You know?
Oh no, totally. I think the best thing we can all do is approach each other on a basic level as people, not make an assumption about what anybody's background, gender, or anything means to their decision making skills, and trust what they do in their merit, and that's the best thing we can do. But I think it happens. I know that's
sure.
Sure, it's going to happen.
I think you have to find a balance. I
Yeah.
mean, a lot of the things that I bring up in the context of the podcast that I do, the group that I run, that kind of stuff, is because I don't think there's been enough discussion about it out there.
Yeah.
And I think there needs to be more discussion. But it's not, I think you can also have a discussion without being condemning of what's being discussed or the people who might be doing the actions that you're discussing. It's just,
sure.
Hey, maybe you're not aware of this, or I'm fully aware that we're dealing with, hundreds of years of language that operate a certain way.
Yeah. Oh no, and I mean, those assumptions are there. Those assumptions are going to be there, and they have to be dealt with. I mean, really, that is absolutely the case. Like Carolyn says, like, how do you not go around feeling like you're walking on glass? Hey, sometimes you do. No lie. Sometimes you do. Sometimes you worry you're going to say something, or you cringe a little bit because you're sitting around the table and you realize that the old boy network's in effect and people are saying stuff you don't agree with. I mean, sometimes that happens and you have to navigate your way out of it. I'll say this is how I've handled everybody in general, is that I tend to work with the principle of charity. And what I mean by that is this is a philosophical principle. This is something I've talked about and written about many times. No matter if I disagree with somebody or not, I look at them and their point as if they number one, I believe that they believe it to be true, that they believe that it's true and that it's good, the thing that they're saying. I don't try and come up with a crazy reason why they believe it. I try and go with the most rational explanation of the belief that they're telling me. Because that's, I assume that they are using their most rational mind. I assume that they are not insane. If it's something that makes me feel like that is the assumption you make. If it's not, you're not insane, you're not infirm. You have a real reason why you believe the thing you believe, and you believe it is right and good. If you start from that assumption, even if you don't like what someone's saying, you start from that assumption and then work out, you tend to come up with a better response to what's going on. And you also find out, the other thing I'll say, here's the nasty half of it. The nice half of it is principle of charity. The nasty half of it is that I don't ascribe to like ill will, something that's equally explained by stupidity or ignorance. If someone is just ignorant of a subject, I don't ascribe them to have an evil plan to make my day bad if they just don't know what the hell they're doing.
They're just dumb.
Yeah, or ignorant. Ignorant could be, you could not be stupid and just not know what you're talking about.
They're not educated about the particular whatever.
I don't attribute that to malice. If someone just hasn't been, it's like actually in Icelandic, it is a great thing, and Old Icelandic especially, there's the way they say stupid is like heimskur. Heimskur means someone who's been around the house too much, someone who's stayed at home, they haven't traveled. And the concept in Old Norse was like you had to get out to understand what was going on in the world. If I know somebody who hasn't gotten around, and I feel like they have some answers to these questions that I don't like, I also have to think to myself and go, they haven't really been exposed to anything that's challenged their vision of the world. If someone hasn't been around people and they have some ideas about people they don't understand, I'm not saying that I don't dislike things they may say about business or people or embroidery or anything, but I might stop and go, well, if you don't really know what it is, it's hard for me to think that you're maliciously trying to, say the thing you're saying. I'll at least try and say, all right, here's where we go first. This is what, I'm going to go to the principle of charity first. It doesn't always work. I mean, if somebody is just nasty, they really are malicious, it does happen.
Well,
then,
yeah, but
then
most,
you
the
can tell
majority of people aren't. And Carolyn's trying to get us back on track here.
For sure.
Question business-wise, does anyone factor in thread when they are doing a job? Like if the specialty thread is involved, and do they charge for stitch outs for the customers? I do.
Yeah. No, okay. I would say personally, yeah.
I would agree. Yeah. I mean, specialty thread too. I often wonder about this one because specialty thread, it can be a little more difficult than regular thread.
Sure.
So and that's something I've never actually asked an embroiderer now that I think about it. So, Mr. Embroiderer, do you charge?
No, I would say we don't charge extra for, if we're talking about specialty thread like metallics, which is the one thing people say, okay,
Yeah.
metallics run poorly.
Everybody hates them.
Yeah, everybody. Well, people hate running metallics. I'd say a lot of it because they haven't gotten themselves tuned in for how they need to run metallics. Especially also if you don't have
metallic.
Yeah, they don't have a great brand of metallic. Their machines aren't ready for it. They're not running. They're trying to run it the same way they run polyester, which it doesn't really run the same way. Or honestly, the other thing is digitizing can make a difference for this. And I know people don't like to hear this, but a ton of short stitches in a row, excess density will cause friction, will cause breakage. You can also have teeny tiny short stitches where you are cutting the previous stitch you've just made. And if you do this repeatedly, you are going to get pull out or breakage. These kind of things happen if you're not careful with metallics more. I would say that most shops, going to a customer and kind of nickel diming them on that stuff is really hard. Metallic is assumed to be a fairly normal thread. Now, if someone came to me with a question for like retro reflective, if you've seen retro reflective thread, and I'm not talking about just like a foil, real retro reflective thread that has glass beads in it that reflects like a 3M a Scotch light does. That stuff has glass beads in it. It's super expensive. It's incredibly expensive. You have to factor that in because there's no way you can just throw that in the end of the run and make money. So, and the same thing with specialty colors. I've had multiple ways I've handled specialty colors where I've said, all right, if you have a customer who absolutely must have a color, often what we'll do is go ahead and say, you're going to buy one round of this to load the machine. Like if I have a 12 head that I'm running your designs on, you're going to buy 12 cones of this thing as part of it. It will be kept in your stock for a period of time. After that, it's part of the shop's complement of threads. And what that means is if you keep ordering, that becomes your stock. You keep running it. We don't charge you for it again later. And we also will start to take that on as part of our stock. But the first outlay for this thing, you are helping us to fund that first outlay. Either that or we do a surcharge per garment. And what we're really doing anyway is we're funding the thread run. I have done that before. Usually we'll have people do that, or especially threads like fire resistant threads. Flame resistant threads are expensive as well, and especially if you're using the proper stabilizers as well that are fire resistant, those are expensive, and I those were charged for in excess of the embroidery as well. But like I said, specialty threads, when we're talking about like a variegated color thread, maybe you do the whole thing I said before about a color run or something like that. But metallics, I wouldn't charge more for metallics for the runtime. I would figure that out across a spectrum and say this is just a normal experience of running the garment. She does talk about charging for stitch outs. That's a tough call too. I would say that large enough customers who are getting throughput, that may be something that becomes an offer as part of the job. But because the shops I was in, we were doing in-house digitizing, obviously, that was part of the digitizing fee. So that's the thing. If you're charging for digitizing or setup,
so
yes,
we've got
charged for
a couple other comments here. Cindy says I charged for the Nomex.
Yes.
So there you go. Mike says $100 in school. Yeah, I charge for the reflective.
Heck yes.
Jeff is asking, would you consider glow in the dark to be a specialty thread? I would.
Yeah, I would. Absolutely. But I also, like I said, I wouldn't necessarily charge more for it, especially with the modern glows that don't run so poorly. Back in the day when all glow in the dark was like monofilament thread, when it was like it's stretchy fishing line, and it snapped all the time. Yeah, those were horrible times. Now the glow in the darks are not that hard.
Yeah. And Tom said we don't charge if the logo is digitized by us. So I'm assuming that would be for stitch outs.
Yeah, and that's one of those things where if that's part of your offer that you're operating, because that's how ours was. It was baked into the fee of digitizing for us because we were certainly charging digitizing. If someone else if we had somebody bring in customer supplied, and I will say tapes. That tells you how long I've been in this industry. Not that I've ever done tapes myself, but that I came from people who taught me the word tapes.
Right.
No, I've never punched a paper tape, everybody. I'm not quite that far along.
Tapes. I've never actually had.
I've never actually made one. I have seen them though. But yeah, if someone brought in their customer supplied file, then the testing of the file, absolutely, we're going to charge you and say, okay, yeah, we'll bring it in. Let's do a stitch out because we're not going to do it until you approve a stitch out because we need to see how this thing runs before we agree to running it. And frequently that would be if I have to edit this thing to make it run, we have to have a discussion about that.
Yeah, then we're gonna have to charge.
I will be honest and say this. I've had clients large enough or orders important enough that I decided to redo their design gratis because it made sense. Once we had the contract in place and the orders there, and I'm looking at, 3,000 pieces, there are times where I'm like, why am I fighting about this customer supplied thing that needs a little sprucing? What often happened is suddenly they're like, I don't know why, but your shirts just look better than the ones we had done last time. And I'm like, because I replaced your entire file. Because I replaced your file before I ran the sample because it wasn't worth fighting.
And Tom said, I have made paper tapes.
Tom's an OG.
That was one of the fascinating things about when I was at Enmart, because the company was founded the parent company was founded in 1974. So they did stencils, they did paper tapes, they did, the original embroidery from like way, way back. So the stories they could tell. If I ever did a history of the industry podcast there, wow, that would be fun.
Oh, no, that's something we've actually thought about. We talked about it in Brilliance as well. As we talk about history a lot, and we actually go back to kind of the history of Schiffley machines and the history of machine embroidery. And because the technology itself, it's always born out from that. The DST format is not really different than a paper tape. I mean, it's still there. Those coordinate stitches are still there. It's not much different than it has been. So it's really interesting, though. Yeah.
Well, it is fascinating if you haven't hear somebody who actually did it. Like when they were talking about how they were making emblems, because Ensign Emblem was the parent company, and they were making emblems with stencils. And I was just like, I can't even. And how long that would have taken? Oh my goodness!
Just the digitizing. The reason we call it punching, right? We were talking about punching the paper tapes. But when people were doing stitch by stitch, and there were actually two people who did the digitizing. You had the cartoonist who was drawing the 6:1 blown up version of your logo, and then marking off with like a Swiss wheel the essentially marking off the densities for you so you could hit them. And then someone just sitting there, even when it was digital, with a puck, just one stitch at a time, laying it all out. I've done that, but not a lot.
Future topic: history of machine embroidery.
That might be a multi-show, multi-channel thing that happens. Yeah, take up will hit that.
But all of a sudden I have a pen. That would be a really good topic. I don't know why.
Take up will do that. Don't worry. I'm handling a million things over here. I have cups and pens and stuff. I'm filling.
Carolyn says hand punch the hand drawn designs for chain stitch here. Well, Carolyn talked when we did the Women in Garment Women and Business podcast. She talked about working in her mother's embroidery business when she was a kid. Yeah, and how they did work to finish garments and stuff. So they.
If you ever see her samples, if Carolyn decides to share them again, and people should follow her, the samples of the hand-guided Cornely chain stitch machine work that her mom did,
amazing.
Super cool stuff. I hear a lot of hand-guided work as well, because I think it's honestly, when we're talking about embroidery, it's all fiber art, it's all informative, and I think that you can learn from any form of it. And honestly, I do some manual work. Actually, okay, Jeff has a comment. I'll read it.
I have manually punched something stitch by stitch to get around software limitation. It's a labor of love-hate.
Here's the thing. There's an amount of control you cannot assume a computer can do. I mean, we've seen some amazing stuff with, the cloud and AI, and especially when we're talking about the massively distributed computing, stuff like that. Now there are some things that were never possible, but everybody always kind of leans on like automatic digitizing, stuff like that. There are certain things that are best done stitch by stitch or by hand. I know I do my blending that way, some of the really intense blends, not because you can't blend with some automatic tools, but because there's a level of blending you do where you're trying to get one layer of density so that the garment is super pliable, but you still want a multicolor blend. That's something that's done manually. And like he says, labor of love, but something you almost hate to do because you know that it's hard to make it profitable, and it's hard to keep yourself entertained and on track for that many stitches. I guess we're spoiled because back in the day, that's what everybody did. But I remember a day where one of the original digitizers was giving me flack. I always tell people what I charge, and people are horrified by how much I charged for tapes back in the day. And then somebody else, I remember having one of the older people who came to me when I first started doing this work and telling me, oh yeah, we used to make, $100 for 100, like for one case stitches was $100, and people would pay $400, $500, $600, $700 a tape for a normal left chest design. That was normal because it was an incredibly laborious and technical process, very hard to do. So it's all relative, but the history of embroidery, nonetheless, very interesting stuff.
Well, I think it's fascinating anytime you can spend time learning about what came before you and then think about what's coming. I was having this discussion with a friend of mine the other day about, funnily enough, the little slides that they used to put in projectors, the little cardboard. I'm young enough, or I'm old enough to remember those from when I was a kid. And my grandmother would go on a trip. When she went to China, she came back with all her slides of the trip, and then we sat and watched them. And I'm like, there are generations now who have no idea what I'm talking about, who's never seen that, who've never done that, who would have no clue what I even mean.
Yeah.
And, I don't feel that old. So it feels like to me that it's, Jeff Fuller says, overhead projectors in the Oregon Trail.
We must not be too far off, Jeff. I think you and I might not be too far off. That sounds about right. I had like a kind of an older school, and we had all Apple IIs and stuff. So definitely did some Oregon Trail time.
You want to know? I took typing class my senior year of high school on an electric typewriter.
Yeah, I still remember typewriters.
I graduated. I'm going to date myself now. I graduated in 1987. So 51, if anybody wants to do the math, is how old I am now. But computers were just starting to happen when I went to college. And how different it's become and when you look at how different it's become just in our daily life versus how different it's become in the industry of the things you can do now and the machine capabilities that are available and the stuff that, probably even 10 years ago, nobody was even thinking of.
Oh, certainly. Though I will say this, when you're coming down to like a stitch by stitch basis in embroidery, the machine itself is very similar to a machine from 100 years ago. The interlock sewing machine head is very similar. It's everything before that and everything that's running it is different. But like the first worker machines that moved a pantograph and stitches happened, that portion has not changed a lot. So the artistry of interpreting art into stitches is still kind of similar, and learning the history is useful for that, even though the technology behind how you do that is very different. Because I know we're 10 years apart. So I graduated in 1997. And so for me, the difference is that the internet was just becoming a thing. I had a website that I built when I was on the college campuses, when I was, I took college courses when I was in high school. And during that time, I had my own web space because UNM gave me that space like one of the students did. And I remember having a website really early when there weren't websites. You could finish the internet. But when I started looking at it.
Are you laughing at Cindy saying that we're babies?
Yeah, a little bit. I'll take
it, man. I'll take it. I'm
like, okay. Yeah.
Well, what makes me laugh is I remember my father bringing home, must have been my senior year in high school. He brought home a Commodore 64.
Oh, yeah.
And this was like the computer. And I mean, you could spend like about 3 days to program it to do basically nothing. But I am by no means a computer programmer, but I spent a ton of time trying to get this thing. They had like I think it was a little booklet or something that you could learn how to type in the programs and it would tell you how to do it. And I look at that and I think about, I carry more computing power in my purse now.
All day long. Yeah. By a mile.
Crazy. So what did Jeff say here? Because this looks interesting. I think the 3D printed CNC machines that turn old sewing machines is pretty cool. Extremely slow, but cool to see people expand what they know and update their old equipment to the modern age.
Yeah, I've seen those people who are doing their own controllers for embroidery machines, and because you can read like the DST standard file, you can then feed that to,
he says turn old sewing machines to embroidery machines. Okay, Jeff can't type today.
Super slow. It's hard to fight because the unanimity of embroidery machines that are inexpensive these days makes it hard to fight for like, I'm going to get out an old Singer and throw pretty gear on it when you can just go $400 and you pick up a an old brother machine that takes DSD on a USB stick. It's hard to fight for it, but I really do like it. What I would love to see, if I had a wish for the open source community, it would be for a head unit or for electronics to run old commercial embroidery machines. Because I've seen commercial embroidery machines where all of the rails and the pantograph and everything's working, but we lose the boards. And once you lose the head unit or the boards, you really can't do a certain thing with it. If you had a universal way to replace that head unit and operate one of those machines, like I had a lovely, an old turret-headed, like it was a Barrett machine, I believe, that was a lovely machine. But once the electronics start to go, you can't use it. But everything else had been maintained, and all the iron, if you want to put it that way, all the big iron was still fine. You could have operated that. I would love to see somebody who's doing this kind of work with CNC and with machine controlling do that. It'd be fun. I know nobody wants to hear that. Also, I hate to say it's hard because once again, the modern machines and for what they cost, you can get so much and they do so much. And there's stuff that is new. The stuff that is new, like the ability to raise and lower your presser foot or a floating presser foot, stuff like that. The fact that the kind of motors we use to control things or serve us is different than it used to be, and they are better, more precise, and operate differently. But it is, I would love to see some of those old machines resurrected, just because I also just like to see the old machines running.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's the reason that we go to museums and we go to see these things actually working. So, I think there's something. If you love something, you also tend to love the history of it too. What made it what you're doing now. So
that would be my favorite thing. If I could have a shop where I had the newest ZSK machine running that had all the gear and the attachments, and then I also could have a worker machine and if I could have a history of embroidery machines in a shop, you better believe I would run it in a minute. I'd be there for that. I would be there to be the living history, Colonial Williamsburg, Eric, through the history of embroidery. I would do that in a minute, but that's just me.
I like the history of it too. I've said several times, and I pitched it to various magazines. It just never quite got to I'd love to do a series on the history of various, decorating techniques and things like that. I mean, even what sublimation went through. Sublimation has gone through its own little set of evolutions, I guess, and and I'm sure screen print has, and I'm every Jeff, thank you, Jeff.
Of course, Jeff.
I would read it. But there's something interesting in seeing how people built on what they had to get to where we are.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's the case. And honestly, it's informative for multiple reasons. It's not just that, we're kind of having ourselves a pat on the back and how far have we come. It's that sometimes things get lost. I'll say that. I have learned a great deal from traditional embroidery and digitizing and old machine embroidery previous to what we did pre-computer machine embroidery. I learned a lot by understanding the way that those stitches were constructed. And things that have then been brought forward with me when I learned that stuff. I mean, some of the stuff that, because we had a better, faster way of doing it, we lost some things in the process. And also knowing the foundations of how something works on an atomic level. If you know something down to its base, down to the origin, you understand how a computer is making decisions and why. I did this, the last take-up I did was about drawing tools and the different kinds of tools there are in digitizing software. And some part of understanding how they work is knowing that they were made specifically for embroidery and they were separate from vector drawing, and that now we're working with these two modalities that are being brought together, and that makes a very different way these things work. It helps us to understand how to use our tools if we know why they are the way they are too. So I think there is some functional reasoning for this. It's not just historic and trivia time. It's not just like a pub conversations, but it is something that we can certainly learn from and bring into our actual work. And I think it's the same with, I would think you probably would agree with this, Kristine, marketing, that there's a lot to be learned from the history of marketing and advertising that is great today, even though we're doing it in a very different medium.
Well, and there's also, I think, a lot to be learned from how, I think sometimes we get too quick to discard an old way because there's something I'll admit, I don't write very much pen and paper anymore. I did when I was younger because that was basically, I had a really ancient electric typewriter, but it was crap and it wasn't, And
Yeah.
so I wrote pen to paper because it was faster. Now I can type a gazillion words faster than I can ever write, but there are still times when something just seems to need to be written on paper with a pen. And, you know, I think there's information that comes from doing things in a maybe less current way sometimes.
Oh, sure. Well, and honestly, there's studies on pen and paper writing that it's better for processing and for memory retention. They said for note taking, a bunch of the universities did studies about this, where it was like the note taking and the absorption of information is better when you're engaging your body as well as, you know, engaging your hand and you're writing and forming those words. Also, because it slows you down, it makes you think more and process. Part of it's like you have to abbreviate because you cannot write as fast as you type. You literally have to do more processing to get it to the page, and so your memory retention is better. And I think that there's something for that.
There's something to be said for that, but there's also something from just, I think it does two things. If you go back and you look at how they used to do it, you appreciate the skill of the people who were doing it then, and you also appreciate the abilities that we have now that they don't.
Yeah.
So, you know, I mean, Frank. Frank says, type pen and paper for me. I'm going, Frank, how do you ever write anything?
Oh, I don't know how you manage it, man.
Oh, man.
And that's the thing. I mean, I think you're totally right. I mean, the way we approach things. Also, Jeff brought this up earlier. He said sometimes he does manual digitizing in order to get past a machine limitation. And I'll say, without saying limitations in software, there's also certain things that a computer just is not game to do that are creative, that take something a little fuzzier. It's something a little more organic, and that's something that we can do, and it was done more frequently when people were using more manual tools. Also, there are just certain things where it's like, if you have the mastery of that manual portion of it, you can do things that aren't dictated by the tool. The tool is there to speed things up that were done frequently manually. When you like a fill stitch is there because they used to have to plot them all out, and they realized we're doing this all the time. Can we automate it? Yes, we can. The thing is, they still were doing other kinds of stitches. The problem now is because the fill stitch is there and it's so fast, everybody then uses them too much. Because if I want to fill a large area with stitches real fast, I don't want to think about it. I can, you know, here's a shape, start point, end point, angle, fill, we're done.
There you go.
But you might realize that that object you're looking at should be broken up into 3 or 4 pieces to make it more artistic. But if you just use the shape that comes in, it's like vector import. As soon as you bring that shape in and you think that's the only shape I have, you stop interpreting art anymore. You're just starting to, you know, you're doing coloring book work. You're filling in existing voids that are already there. It's when you slow down that you sometimes get that process involved. And I think that may be worthwhile as well, certainly.
Well, it's almost, I think, a trope in literature that, you know, there's always the story of, you know, the person who's starting out and they're the apprentice and they're made to do it the old way. And they go, why do I have to do it this way? There's this new thing. Why can't I do that? And then, of course, further on in the story, there's an emergency or something, and they find out that knowing how to do it the old way saves the day and fixes the problem.
Well, and I'll go ahead and say that there's new ways. And the best thing, though, is if you know the history and you have all that input, it gives you, you have that grist for the mill that eventually you're like, okay, if I know how to make it work and I know what the result is, then you have a better chance of understanding the next jump from there too. Because I will say, admittedly, one of my favorite things to tell people is that because it's the way we've always done it is the worst reason to do anything because it doesn't actually have any value behind it. It doesn't tell you anything about the action or why you're doing it. I mean, we all have the thing we're trying to get to. If tomorrow software suddenly did perfect blending that was a one density layer the way that I do it, I would let the software do it because it takes an innumerable amount of time, you know, hours to do this stuff. I would let the software do it. I don't do fill stitches manually most of the time either, almost ever. There are some times I'm going to tweak the stitch, but I'm very rarely going to.
Just because you have the ability doesn't mean that you should necessarily. I mean, if there is a labor-saving device, I mean, you know, I have a sink, but I also have a dishwasher. So where do the dishes go?
Knowing how they're formed, though, like knowing how to wash a dish means that when something goes wrong and it's not washing the dishes correctly, you might be able to break down the steps. I mean, that's the same thing. Knowing how to form a fill stitch means that when somebody talks about how fill stitches are formed or if something's not working correctly, I understand how that is. So it's there are certain things like that, like with tools, where you just say, okay, the tools are there, but we should understand it. In fact, that's why I rail a little bit, and this is makes me a little unpopular sometimes. We're talking about pricing earlier. When people just go straight to, I want an Excel spreadsheet with functions built in, hand me an Excel spreadsheet so that I can put in a couple numbers and out comes my pricing. I'm not saying you can't have one of those or they're not good, but if someone isn't very good about explaining that to you, then you are really not, you don't own your pricing and understand.
Yeah, you don't understand how you arrived at it. You're just plugging the numbers in and trusting somebody else who may have a different matrix or different values or whatever than you do. So
someone else has made your decisions for you. You just don't see it.
And as Frank has so accurately called it now, woohoo, bonus time. We're almost 10 minutes over, and I know us, so we could go for another 5 hours. So perhaps maybe ought not to do that, though.
No, we can cut back from here. We'll maybe cut a little bit more discussion. We'll cut back. I mean, 15 minutes isn't bad. That's what I usually do.
Okay, well let's throw out my comment here. Auto digitizing is a good. You know me. I'm not going to say no. Auto digitizing is a good example of this. Knowing what is and how to use it also empowers people to understand when it shouldn't be used.
Sure. And I'll say this: when someone, I don't like auto digitizing. We all know,
which is most of the time.
People know that I'm fairly anti auto digitizing. This doesn't mean there's not a way to use it. Same thing with vector import, right? And I use vector import, and I tell people all the time, bringing in vector objects and then starting to assign stitch types to them. I don't like it. Why do I not like it? Not just because I'm an old crusty digitizer who redrew everything because that's how you had to do it. That's not why. I mean, I'm not going to lie and say I don't have bias because of how I started. But for me, it's about the fact that these shapes aren't made for embroidery, so I'm going to do a bunch of editing, and I might make different decisions as I bring them in. Same thing with auto digitizing. Can you use it for something? Yes. Have I even used it for something? Yes, I have. I've used it. I've used automatic tools to help me draw a shape. The thing is, I'm the kind of person who I will always edit the shape knowing what it needs to be because I understand pull compensation and distortion and push compensation, and I know how pathing affects a design. If you know all of that stuff and you know what you would do manually, you might be able to use a tool to automate a thing. If you don't know any of that stuff, then you become the person who does push button conversions, and push button conversions don't work. And if you don't know why things are going off the rails, you're just kind of hitting it with a hammer. It's not, you don't actually have the ability to use the tool because you don't know why it makes the decisions it makes. You just know that you said do it and it isn't working the way you want it to. You don't actually have any, it's a black box. So that's one of those things. It's like, whether it's the low amount of automation, which is filling stitches and not doing them manually, which we all use, or the super high amount of automation, which is full auto digitizing, which I really don't like anybody to use if they don't have to. No matter what level of automation you're at, if you don't kind of understand the base decisions, and for me, it's this, it's the interaction between needle, thread, machine, file, stabilizer, fabric. That interaction, which is a holistic interaction, all those things have issues. And when I talk about design, that's also settings, pathing. Like, there's a bunch of sequencing. All of that goes together. If you don't know how the machine works, if you don't know how what those things do to the design, then the automation takes away some agency from you. It takes away your ability to make choices. Whereas if you know what that is, then you can let it make choices, then go back and say, yeah, I see what you did there. Automated software that has these baked into it. Now I'm going to go break a couple of shapes up, change this, add some compensation, and now it'll work. So there's, absolutely. Time saver, yes. And this is pricing, this is marketing, this is anything. When we get focused on tools, anytime it takes away your decision making entirely, it seems like they're doing you a favor, but the likelihood is you are now at the whim of whoever made the tool and whatever decision it wants to make for you. So there's a trade.
And if you understand how to do whatever it is you're doing, even if you do elect to use whatever the time-saving tool is, the one that always gets me, and I've ranted about this several times is automating all your social media.
Yeah.
Hate it, hate it, hate it, hate it, hate it, hate it. A lot. I really, really hate it.
Yeah.
And the reason that I hate it is because social media to me is about connection and community. And I'm sorry, you can't develop that if you're planning your posts 4 weeks out. You just can't. Yeah. And I'm not saying you can't automate some of it. I'm not saying it can't be helpful on occasion, but I think there has to be a good mix. And a lot of people kind of have the Ron Popeil kind of set it and forget it sort of thing. And I'm like, no, this is, and yes, I fully realize I just dated myself horribly, but if you have never seen a Ron Popeil infomercial, you have missed one of great experiences in life. You should look him up on YouTube. I'm sure he's still there. But I mean, it's the same theory. You have to understand how whatever it is you're doing works. Even if you elect to use the automated option, you should still know that how to do whatever you need to do in case the automated option sucks, basically.
Yeah. Well, and on top of it, what you'll find with social media is sometimes the automation there's a strike against it where they change the way things get promoted because they don't love you using automation. Because what social media about is having you spend time on those sites so they can access you.
Right. So they can put ads in front of you and all that.
That's why they don't want third party. They're not going to let you just use third party software to not be present. And on top of that, it's like you said, I always told somebody you want to use automation cool. When someone comments on that automated post, you better be present to answer or talk to them.
Well, and the other problem with automation can be that you try to automate the same exact post across every platform, and then it's suited for one platform and not for the others, and then it ends up, you end up losing any effectiveness from that post on 3 of the 4 platforms that you're using. It's just, there's a lot of, it's like anything else. I mean, anything you do, you need to understand the parameters of the medium, whatever it is, whether it's like you said, whether you're dealing with stabilizer and fabric and thread and needles, or whether you're dealing with Facebook and Pinterest and Instagram and Twitter or TikTok or whatever it is, you know, you have to understand. And that's one of the things I get very militant on this subject, because that's one of the things that people will come to me and they'll say, well, social media doesn't work. It doesn't work. And I'll say, well, what did you do? Well, I got Hootsuite and I set up a bunch of posts and I told people to come buy my stuff and I ran it on all these platforms. And I say, well, where are your customers? Well, I don't know. Hootsuite, or I was told that I should be on these 4 platforms. So that's what I did. Well, what did you post? Well, I just put up pictures of my shirts with pricing and I said, come buy them. And I said, and did you get comments? Well, a few people asked questions. Did you reply? No. Okay, well,
which is like, that's the money.
You know, I mean, and granted, that's a very like exaggerated version, but okay. And now
we're past our bonus time again, but
we had people bet on bonus time because we could have, I don't know, we may have to have a prize or something.
Yeah, right.
Mike says I would pay almost anything for an automatic hat hooper, though. I think if someone could develop one of those, they could probably charge. Oh, I like this.
Of course, right?
First time watching Kristine. Really love listening to her. Erich, you're cool too.
I'm glad I'm cool too. Here's Kristine. By the way, to let you guys in on this, before we start, Kristine says, "Oh well, should I introduce you or not? Everybody's going to be here for you anyway." And here I am. I'm cool too. I'm second fiddle today. So.
Oh, thank you, Julie. That made my day right there.
No worries.
All right. Yeah.
Can't win them all.
Bonus time. Well, we could go another 13 minutes and go a whole hour and a half.
We can go a little bit longer, but here's the thing I'm going to tell everybody. We are planning to do this again. It won't be every week. We're not doing it regularly like that just yet, but I think we're on again. Maybe in a couple of weeks we'll be on for another show.
The discussion was perhaps potentially July 15th.
So people
Same time,
watch
same
these
page.
spaces. Yeah, watch these spaces, watch our pages. It might be that I might have it on my channel, but it'll be the same branding because we're going to share kind of the duties of having to run the show. But
I ran
yeah,
it
we'll come back.
and I didn't steer us into a rock. I like it.
Yeah, you did fine. It works well. Plus, honestly, we steer ourselves into rocks on like two other guys, and I steer myself into
I
a rock
wasn't
on
going
the
to
table all the
say
time.
but you know.
It happens all the time, folks. It's like live TV. There's no net. If something goes wrong, it goes wrong. But yeah, no,
But
I would
that's part of
say,
the fun of it too, I think.
oh yeah, it's live, it's real, and honestly, that's what hey, that's what we were talking about with social media. It's live, it's
Yes.
real. If you're having a real, genuine conversation with somebody, they can build trust with you. If you are a marketing robot, they can't build trust with a marketing robot. Branding is every experience someone has with you or your company. It's not your logo, it's not your slogan, it's not your branding guide necessarily. The brand you really have with the customer is every experience they have with you. And if you're wasting those experiences and not like somebody not answering questions when you ask, I love when people ask me questions online because invariably I have a chance to answer them and we open up a conversation that they steered that we got to start it. I see you laughing. I see why.
Yeah.
Here's Cindy. Cindy says, y'all have had a great show. I forgot what the topic was. We didn't have one.
We
And
didn't
so
know.
that's why we just went with it. There was no topic. This is the
The
topic. Whatever
topic
you want to
was
talk about.
kind of we're going to get together and we had kind of outlined a few topic areas if nobody asked us anything, none of which I don't think we touched on at all.
Oh no, those are still open for next time.
Still open. But this is, I mean, honestly, if you want to see Eric and me at dinner, this is pretty much it, except this is shorter. Yeah. I think our last dinner was what, like 5 hours, 6 hours?
At least like 5 hours. Yeah, no. Well, it's like
really long.
Oh yeah, really
and
long.
The poor waitress kept coming over and going, "Are you okay?" And we're like, "Yeah, we're good.
Yeah, we're doing fine."
We just, are we like bogarting your table? And thank God
this is why I tip. This is why I tip pretty heavily. I tip heavily because I sit at tables. I hold tables down pretty long time every time I'm out. But no, you know, honestly, we probably start tying up. I mean, it's good that we can tie it up. But what else?
I don't think we have to go an hour and a half. That's
no.
Silly.
But if you guys have questions, though, the other thing to realize, because we practice what we preach with social media, if you have questions and you answer them after the fact, if you're watching this right now on a replay, just because you can't be in the live commentary doesn't mean you shouldn't ask a question in the comments.
Right.
Very high likelihood we'll answer.
We'll either answer now or we'll put a pin in it and we'll talk about it in 2 weeks.
Right.
Because, you know, in 2 weeks, we will be back here.
Yes, we'll be back here doing this again.
Channel, since you're Batman.
Oh, right. Yeah. That's Todd Downing called me Batman because he didn't know I did other stuff but embroidery. And it turns out, yes, at night I become an e-commerce person. I don't, though, adopt a gravelly voice and run around in a cape or anything. I try not to. I'm recovering.
Well, and I don't actually know what I am yet. Well, I guess Wonder Woman is what Todd called me. Todd seemed to have named everyone. I don't really know why that is. But
yeah, apparently it's he's real heavy into DC. It's the Justice League of embroiderers and decorators, I guess, but I don't know. I'm more of a Marvel guy.
Mike is just being.
Okay, here we go. No,
before you go quickly, why are there so many kinds of staples?
I'm actually we have a couple minutes. I'm going to hit you with this. This is just an observation. We don't have to go over everything that we talk about stabilizers. But here's the thing: stabilizers actually have different uses, so that you have different results on different materials. And the thing that kills me is when I first came in, commercial embroiderers had tear away, cut away. That's like, and if you were really advanced, you had white and black. Like that was what happened when I first came in. Since then, we have performance stabilizers for stretchy performance materials, but you still want them to have a nice hand so they're thinner and they don't show through as much or have a ghost, an outline around them. We have water solubles or heat solubles even, so that you can use stuff where you stabilizer can leave when you don't want it there, or laces or patches. They really do actually have uses. But I will be honest and say, for me, medium weight cutaway stabilizer one piece is almost all I need for anything. If I'm locked down, if it's desert island time, I'm taking the cutaway with me instead of the tearaway.
Well, and I think
I get one.
That's true. And I have met a number of embroiderers who say the same thing. And I would tell anybody, when people used to ask me back when I dealt with that, our medium weight cutaway was by far my, I know that's Kristine's favorite question. It is. I've written about it about 5 million times. But I mean, there's a reason why I've written about it so much, because poly mesh does make a difference, because cutaway washaway does make a difference, because heat and sew, or the polypropylene, or, you know, all this stuff, or fusible, can make a difference in certain situations. So if you know that it's there and it'll make your life easier, why wouldn't you invest in it? That's all I'm saying.
Oh,
and
like
I have no get this anymore because I don't sell it now. But actually, Eric, remind me, I need to talk to you about that. But that's outside of the. That's an whatever this is.
History happening all the time, everybody. But yes. No, that's the thing. People invariably, it's not that there's too many or too few. In fact, working now as I do, often with craft and home industry on one side and commercial on the other side, and I talk to people all over the place. Really, the craft and home industry has been using multiple stabilizers and all manner of support materials forever. Like, they really use 5 different stabilizers with regularity, whereas a commercial person might not. Lots of them, and lots of different kinds. What I will say is sometimes people will tell you, okay, I build a stack and it's got 2 cutaways and 1 tearaway, and it has this, and it has this on top, and it has this for I'm like, for me, as a dyed-in-the-wool commercial person, I'm like, if I'm using 3 pieces or 4 pieces of stabilizer in different configurations, something has gone wrong, probably with the digitizing or the setup. It's because I'm doing way too much per piece work and using a lot of material that probably isn't necessary. I'm going to look at what I can do to reduce it. Also, why I say stabilizers, I'm so happy Mike said stabilizers, not backing. I preach on that one.
Myself of that, because I was taught backing.
Yeah. Oh, so was I. Yeah.
And over time, especially since a very good friend of mine is a vice president for QST, which is one of the major stabilizer distributors, and he's been the one that's educated me quite a lot. And it's stabilizer. It's not backing.
Well, it has a job to do. I have
broken myself of that for the most part, not entirely.
I still do it sometimes too. I will literally preach about calling it stabilizer, and in the same conversation say backing.
Well, I've written stuff where I will alternate, and it makes me laugh, because I'll go backing, stabilizer, and I'm like,
you have to stop and go correct them.
And decide which one it is. And
well, the conceit for me is, why do you call it stabilizer? Because if it doesn't provide dimensional stability, it's not stabilizer.
There you go.
But if it doesn't arrest stretch.
Cindy says, washaway stabilizer has made my life easier for handkerchiefs. I had never heard of it. Can you tell I am a commercial embroiderer?
Yeah, no. The first time I got to play with washaway, it was a mind-bending experience. It sure made patches a lot easier. If you have to do a lot of cut patchwork, it's a lot nicer to do it my way. Or at least I found it nicer to do it my way.
Well, the one thing that I'm always sad about that never really caught on was Q104. I wanted Q104 to catch on so bad, and we tried, and it just, but really, honestly, I don't know how much practical application it would have had, but it was very cool.
And every time I show the sample, I still have somebody ask where I get it.
Yeah.
They want to do it hard.
And this is something that none of you are going to know. So we need to, we're like 3 minutes away now from an hour and a half. So
here's what I'll say. Well, for the last 3 minutes, Q104 was a water soluble, I would say topping. It's not a great way to put it, but it was a material that was thick and lofty, almost like batting. And you could sew on top of it, the embroidery on top of it, wash it out. And then the loops of thread would kind of stand up proud of the surface. Little bit loose. They were not, it was more distressed. It wasn't like it was like 3D foam, but you could get these really dimensional looks out of it. The problem was, who in commercial embroidery, especially we're talking about custom business to business work, is washing garments after they use them. It was a very retail product. Yeah,
that was the problem with it. Eric did.
I tried
some test run stuff for us that was gorgeous, but it was so labor intensive. And the gentleman, my aforementioned friend from QST, who was trying to get this started, he was saying, oh, we could sell it to Abercrombie, we could sell it to all these people. I'm like, theoretically, but it's not, the labor that's required to get it to work is not going to be scalable for these people. They're going to have to charge so much if they use it. And, you know, Enmart had it, and we ran a contest, and we got some really great things out of that. And Eric did some beautiful pieces, but it was never going to be anything but kind of a fun thing for people to play with. It was never going to be a viable,
it's so hard
commodity.
It's like within the last year, I've had people who are doing retail styled work for business to business who want it again, and I think could make it work because they've already gotten to the point where they're doing like distressed applique and washing it, where they're already, when you already have that much in and you're trying to do work that looks like Champion is doing lately, or, you know, that Lion Brothers is doing for Champion rather, when you're trying to do that retail work and you can get people who are willing to pay for it, cool, then you could totally use it. But it is very hard for it, because we bought a stock of it and we actually had customers using it, but it was very few customers, and it caused issues because when you start washing a garment, that garment is never the same as the garment that comes out with finishing on it. It never looks the same. And it's a very different look. So it's a very different thing, folks. But yeah, there are.
Well, there you go. There's some embroidery history that involved the two of us.
Yes,
so
indeed. And if you guys want to see it, I'll show you.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, if you guys want to see Q104 samples, you know, come ask
Eric
me,
has
we'll post them.
I think there's actually a picture on your page, if I remember
correctly. I still show the Dream Big one that I always show. Well, that was one of the ones. It's my favorite. Yeah, me too.
And the Lotus and the
the Lotus and the Ohm. Yeah, the Lotus and the Ohm is really a fun one too.
Yeah, that one I've used several times too.
And that one I did with Wash Away Behind as well, Q102, Wash Away Behind it, so it had no stabilizer at all remaining. It was really cool piece. Yeah.
But anyway,
okay,
we are
business
now
time. Let's cut it here. 30. It's time to say goodbye, folks.
If you got it on 15 minutes of bonus time, you lost.
by a hair. People.
By a lot. But anyway, it was lovely. Right. We are so glad that you joined us. Please join us again in 2 weeks.
Absolutely.
The 15th at 5 p.m. I'm assuming we're going to just keep, why mess with the formula?
Yep. 3 p.m. Mountain, 5 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Central.
Mountain, 4 p.m. Central, 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific. There.
Wherever you are, folks.
Wherever you are.
Get reminder. When you see us post it, click get reminder.
It will be where Frank is, but he'll have to figure that out for himself.
That's why I love Facebook. Just click get reminder, and you don't have to worry.
Click get reminders. All right, we better say goodbye before we're here for another half an hour.
Yeah, we'll keep it a little tighter maybe next time.
Yeah, and next time. Well, you know, I would say one way to make sure we keep it tighter is to ask us lots of questions so that we can't ramble, even though we still will, but not as much.
Yeah, indeed. But we welcome the questions, folks.
Yes. So thank you. And I'm going to hit end broadcast now before we talk for another 15 minutes. Thank you, guys. This was a lot of fun. We appreciate it. Bye.